Hey guys. I was gonna make something funny, but I tried to do the Batman mask. It was, let's say, too hot, and the doing the Batman voice for about 10 minutes really killed me. So I had to redo it. So I'm not real happy. So I'm just gonna do a regular one this time. We'll work on something funny for next time. All right. So chapter 9, section 1: The French Revolution begins. All right, so we need to make sure that you're aware of the two different types of cause of the French Revolution. We have a long-lasting cause, which is the social inequality of society. The other will be the short range, which will be financial issues, which we'll get to in a second. The long range cause that you need to be aware of is the social inequality is the pyramid that I drew on the board for you today into three sections. You had the clergy at the top, the nobility in the middle, and the commoners at the bottom. And you have right here, you can see down here right by where my head is here. The first estate, it was the clergy, and they numbered about 130,000, which we said was 0.5% of the population. They owned 10% of the land, and they had to pay 0% of the talia. The talia, if you recall, is the chief tax of France at that time. The second estate's the nobility. They were 1.5% of the population, or around 350,000 people, 25% of the land, and leading positions in the military and state. They also did not have to pay any of the talia. Then you have the poor commoners. The commoners were the majority of the population, 98%, or 26.5 million people, 65% of the land, Trent, and paid 100% of the talia. All right, this is a pie graph that you're going to be seeing on the upcoming test, possibly the quiz. If I choose to, you can see it just covers the information that was on the previous slide, information that you should already have on your the diagram that we drew on the board today. All right, so the relics of feudalism. We discussed the relics of feudalism today, and we described them a little more in detail. These are the basic items that people did not have in their homes, and you can see the flour mill, the community oven, and the wine press were examples of this. Today, we went over the fact that how they paid for this, and it was actually you utilized the facilities and you paid with your labor later on in that fall. The bourgeoisie was just the middle class. They were the upper part of the third estate. They had upward mobility, which means they had the ability to move up to become a nobility if they were able to, or they were successful in life. And the way most of them did that is down here right above me right here. It says by taking public office. Okay, and you can see right here above me here, it says holders of public office were often members of the bourgeoisie. So this is how 6,500 new nobles were created as a result of this this social class. All right, so that was the long-term cause. The short-term cause is going to be the near collapse of the government's finances, the fact that France was broke. You had a series of crises over 50 years that really, I described it as being like a roller coaster that really set France on a very volatile path. You had two consecutive bad harvests that you can see right here, 1787 and 1788. And then the king's spending. The king's wife, Marie Antoinette, was well known for extravagance, and Louis the 16th spending a lot of money on the American Revolution to get back at the British for what they had done to what they had done in the 7 Years' War, in the War of the Austrian Succession. All right, so he had no choice but to call a meeting of the Estates General. That's France's legislative body. They haven't met since 1614. That was nearly 175 years. So this is a big deal. This is the first time in anyone's lifetime that they actually had met to discuss issues, and it's something that the king just didn't handle himself. Okay, so at the National Assembly, I'm going to go to the next slide for this information. You can see it's in a little better detail. And okay, so this is the same little type of triangle that we drew in class today, but you have the first estate had 300 representatives, the second estate or the nobility had 300 representatives, and the third estate will have 600 representatives. Now, the problem is, this is fine because you can see that 0.5% of the population has 300, 1.5% of the population has 300, and then 98% has 600. At least they're giving them a little bit of they're acknowledging the fact that this group is a little large. The problem comes on the next slide. The problem is where they have the number of votes. Each estate only had one vote, which means if the third estate proposes the change in the government that would force the first and second estate to pay the talia, the clergy and the nobility would always outvote them 2-1. So then the change
proposed by the Third Estate was to go back here and then grant each of these representatives one vote. If each representative had one vote, then they'd no longer need 151 votes. They would only need one. And that is a big deal. But just like in any absolute monarchy, for anything to become a law, it must be approved by the king. So they go to Louis XVI and look down here. At the very bottom, it says Louis XVI insisted that the ancient distinction of the three orders be conserved in its entirety. So basically what he's saying there is he didn't believe it was broken, so why fix it if it's not broken? And this will allow the Third Estate. It basically tells them that they know that the king's not going to side with them, and they need to break away. So they go from the Estates General to the National Assembly. So on June 7th, 1789, they declare themselves the National Assembly. The king gets upset and he tries to lock the doors. And he locks the doors, but the National Assembly will not allow this to stop them. They went to another room, the next largest room that they could find. It was an indoor, they call it a tennis court, but the History Channel documentary said it was like a handball court. And this is where they gave the tennis court oath. The tennis court oath is where they promised to meet no matter what the king did until they produced a new French Constitution. You can see TJ sitting down there in the middle. We'll talk about him in class. All right, so 1789. July 4, 1789, 900 Parisians gathered in the courtyard of the Bastille. They attacked the Bastille. The Bastille was a prison, and they knew that they could find one thing at the Bastille, and that was gunpowder. They needed to actually get gunpowder for the muskets that they had. So they attacked and they dismantled the Bastille brick by brick. After this occurred, the fear began to develop in the people that the king would retaliate against the assault on the Bastille. So they began to form militias and gearing up for a revolution. Okay, there's the fall of the Bastille, no big deal. All right, so the destruction of the old regime. They get rid of the old type of government officially when they issue the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It was obviously inspired by the American Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and the English Bill of Rights. And you can see it says that it's the liberty, property, security, resistance to oppression, all that stuff. The question will become that does all of this, sorry, I skipped something. It says that no group should be exempt from taxation right here, right above me. No group should be exempt from taxation. That's one of the sticking points because that was the point of the Talia. The First and Second Estate were exempt from the Talia, and they did not have to pay it, so the Third Estate was upset, and they felt that they needed to pay their share of the taxes. Sound familiar? No taxation without representation type of a deal? All right, it says freedom of speech and press were also affirmed, so let's move on. All right, so the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The question that's going to be raised from this point is, does the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the citizen include women? And women are going to actually ask this question. One woman in particular will be this one right here, Olympia de Gouges. She will ask, does this include women? And it may surprise you that the men said, yes, it actually does include women, but women are not expected to use these rights in public, which is sort of a slap in the face. So Olympia de Gouges refuses to accept that idea, and she will issue her own declaration. And she issues, right down there at B, she wrote the Declaration of the Rights of the Woman and the Female Citizen. Now, I'm all for women's rights, but there's a time and a place. You need to know when you can speak up and when you can't. And guess what happens to her? Yep, during the Reign of Terror, she's guillotined. So she spoke up for her rights, but she also ultimately died for those rights as well. All right, so Louis will remain at Versailles, 12 miles outside of Paris, sort of just hanging out with his wife, until the fish ladies from the market will attack with broomsticks, pitchforks, and that cannon, and they march on Louis, and they attack and they want to rip the queen apart. And part of that deal, they force the king and his family to move to Paris for the rest of their lives. Okay. They bring them back, and here is an artist rendition of that event where you can see all of the weapons that the women had, and this cannon really scares me. Yeah, I would move back to Paris as well. All right, so under the old regime, the Catholic Church has been an important pillar of the old order. The 1791. This will become more important next section, and then later on we talk about Napoleon. The government will seize and sell the lands of the church to increase state revenues, to pay for the debt that was incurred before the revolution actually started. The Constitution of 1791 set up a limited monarchy. So did they get rid of the king? No, they were willing to keep the king. They keep the king until the king decides to try to run for Austria and gets caught at Varennes. That's when they totally flip it up. up and they say, okay, the king must die. The Legislative Assembly is going to make the laws with the king, but in actuality, what they're going to be doing is working with the king to make the laws. The European leaders began to fear that the revolution would spread to their countries. This became part of the Great Fear, and later on we're going to talk about the idea of the principle of intervention. They will develop the idea that they can step in to stop a revolution and restore order. It says Austria and Prussia even threatened to use force to return Louis XVI to full power. Okay, so the Legislative Assembly will declare war on Austria against Maximilien Robespierre's wishes. All right. The French Revolution entered a more radical and violent phase. Members of the new Paris Commune took the king captive. This is after the king tried to run to Austria. He became a turncoat at that point, and as a result, the only path for a traitor is death. So the king will be tried, and he's put to death by one vote. One vote seals his fate, and he is dead. They forced the National Assembly to suspend the monarchy and to call for a national convention. So we'll talk about that a little later. During this phase, we have a new group of patriots formed, and they are members of the Paris Commune. They are called sans-culottes, and you can see the picture here to my left. These sans-culottes, I describe them as sort of being like a hippie. They dress a particular way to give the impression that they are not wealthy. Most of the sans-culottes were from the nobility, and they actually were somewhat wealthy. They were able to disguise the fact that they were wealthy to keep themselves safe during the Great Fear. And you can see I often say that they just sort of look like they're wearing their big brother's pants, or it looks like they have caprice. Okay? Well, that's it for this. This is the last slide. So hopefully if you have any questions, feel free to see me whenever you can, either during my duty or before school. All right? Thanks for watching.